Today on Happy, Sad, Confused, Timothée Chalamet on his breakout year with Call Me By Your Name, Lady Bird, and Hostiles. Hey guys, I'm Josh Horowitz. Welcome to another edition of the podcast. As I said, our guest this week is Timothée Chalamet, who, Sammy, I think Timothée might be our youngest guest yet. I think he's 21.
No way.
I think so. You're doing the math?
You're wrong.
What?
Bella Thorne. Gotcha with Bella.
Is Bella younger than Timothée?
Yes, she is not 21.
Okay. Okay, well...
I'm not positive about that, but I'm pretty sure.
You said it so authoritatively.
I know, and then I'm like, oh, God, I don't know.
Usually, people sometimes bring up, younger actors for me to talk to, and I'm hesitant often, especially, if they haven't, put together enough films for me to talk about with them. But there were a couple factors that made talking to Timothée a no-brainer. We've been talking about this great movie, Call Me By Your Name, which is now out. Armie Hammer was on the show just last week. Michael Stuhlbarg's going to be on it on the show very soon. It's a beautiful movie that that movie alone can warrant a long conversation.
I'm seeing it in 3 hours.
We'll come to us then. You're going to love it. If you don't love it, there's something wrong with you.
Well, we'll see.
Okay. Well, no. There's something wrong with you.
No, I'm going to love it.
But beyond that, Timothée, as I said, has quickly. I don't think I knew who Timothée Chalamet was 6 months ago, or at least before Sundance when Call Me By Your Name debuted. But suddenly he's everywhere. He's in Lady Bird, which is another one of my very favorite movies of the year. He's in this Christian Bale movie Hostiles, which I have yet to see, though I've heard good things. And then as I started to do research on Timothée, I got really interested in talking to him because he's a New Yorker. He's done a lot of theater. He's just his performance alone in Call Me By Your Name is already putting him on these Best Actor short lists for awards consideration. He's been winning awards left and right. So he's somebody that I feel very confident in saying this is not just a one trick pony that next year we're going to forget about him. This is the launch of a very exciting career. And he was great to talk to. You were there, Sammy, in Toronto when we chatted with him. And
he and Armie Hammer had such cool chemistry and were so comfortable, and I loved him.
Yeah.
And he does not have a French accent.
He does not, though he speaks fluent French. His dad is French, to clarify.
Did you say to him, why don't you, is this how you found out? Because you were like, well, wait a second.
No, I'd done my research. I knew, so I didn't need to get that clarified. Here's a revelation that to spoil something coming up in the podcast.
Uh-oh. We
went to the same grade school.
What? Didn't Jordan Peele go to that school too?
Yes, Jordan Peele. But the difference is that Jordan Peele and I are roughly the same age. He's a couple years younger. Timothée.
I thought you were going to say Timothy's a couple years younger, I was like,
No, Timothée was very sweet both on the podcast and afterwards. He was he was trying to compare teachers with me, and I'm like,
no, Timothée.
Mine are all dead by now, probably. Yeah. We're different generations, my friend. But it's very sweet of him to think that. There was he grew up close to where I grew up, so fun to kind of just bond with somebody like that.
You were not speaking fluent French, though.
I took a couple years of French.
So do you guys dive into any French in this podcast?
Yes, just so you guys know, this podcast is done entirely in
broken French.
Bien sûr.
Mm-hmm. Really good.
That's all I remember.
That's a good accent, too. It's just, it was beautiful.
So that is this episode of Happy, Sad, Confused. Timothée Chalamet.
We're rooting for him. We like him.
Yeah, he's got tough competition in his category this year. It's Gary Oldman or him, I think, are the two biggies, and I adore Gary Oldman. So I'll be happy either way if it ends up being one of those two.
Okay. As long as you're going to be okay either way.
I'm just saying that
you will survive if either one of them win the Oscar.
Here's what. Okay, first of all,
if someone else comes in and wins, that's it for you.
We have several months left of Oscar race, so let's not get burnt out already.
Okay.
Things can happen. And B, Timothée, win or lose.
He's got a while to go.
He's got a while to go, and the career has been launched, and you're going to fall in love with him on the screen, and you're going to fall in love with him when you listen to this podcast, because he's a charmer.
Oh, I will fall in love with him probably.
Remember, as always, guys, please review, rate, or subscribe, or do all three on iTunes.
Timothy would want you to.
Oh, Timmy Tim definitely.
He
would want
does.
you to.
It's what and he asked in French too.
He did after the podcast. He said,
"To review, rate, and subscribe." That was French.
"That was amazing."
Yeah.
Yours is only slightly better than mine. Enjoy this conversation with Timothée Chalamet, and remember to check out all three of his movies. Hostiles isn't quite out yet, but Lady Bird is in theaters. It is remarkable and beautiful, and Call Me by Your Name. You've heard the buzz. It is well warranted. It's a special one. In the meanwhile, here's this chat with Timothy. Chalamet, good to see you, buddy.
Thanks for having me, and good to see you after meeting you in Toronto for the first time.
Toronto was our first meeting. I think I've said it at least a couple times to you. I'm in love with this movie, as you've heard from many others. And I'm talking to all your friends. I just had Army on last week. Stuhlbarg's coming in tomorrow.
Oh, I didn't know that. Fantastic.
Yeah. I'm a little intimidated by Stuhlbarg.
Stuhlbarg, okay, I had the same experience. I was extremely intimidated by him, and we did a couple rehearsals that left me feeling all the more intimidated. And I had seen him in a play called The Pillow Man in New York when I was 12 by Martin McDonough. That was, again, all the more intimidating.
Yeah.
And then I went on YouTube, and it's like the curse of being an actor or something these days, but all you have to do is type someone's name in, followed by EPK.
Right.
And then everyone's humanized.
Yeah, and he's also, it seems like, I've been watching some interviews with him. He seems like the most soft-spoken, sweetest guy.
That's what's so destabilizing, is because he has played some really intense,
Right.
Not in Call Me By Your Name, he plays like the best father on the planet, but yeah, in other films he's really intense or plays.
I just watched A Serious Man this morning, just because it'd been a while, and
He's so
any
incredible
excuse
in
to
that
watch
movie.
that movie again.
And people say that's like the Coen brothers film that is, the most parallel to what their existence would have been. Growing up, exactly what their father would have been.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot to talk about with you, despite you being perhaps the youngest guest on Happy Sad Confused thus far.
I didn't know that. Is that true?
I think so. I think if not, you're certainly in the top 3.
Great.
So congrats on that distinction.
Thank you.
But you've been making up for the lack of years you've made up for in a lot of work, particularly in this last year, that you should be very proud of.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I've seen 2 of the 3 films. Lady Bird I'm in love with as well, of
Love
course.
that movie.
And I'm seeing Hostiles this week, so we'll complete
Also
the
love that
trifecta.
movie, yeah.
So
What a weird trifecta, right?
It is a weird trifecta.
Tonally, none of them fit in with each other.
And Hostiles seems like the definite
Hostiles
outlier,
is the
right?
definite outlier. I mean, I guess there are, it's 2 coming-of-age stories that...
Period. Both period.
Both period, yes. And Hostiles is period too, but it's very much not a coming-of-age, unless Christian Bale is coming of age in it, but he's not. I've seen it, and it's not a coming of age story.
By the way, it pains me to no end that I'm calling both Lady Bird and Call Me by Your Name period films, since I unlike you, have grown up through both of those periods.
No, well, Lady Bird I would have grown up through, and certainly, I guess I would have only been 5 or 6 years old, but I have distinct memories of Backstreet Boys, CD covers, or Britney Spears. What would it have been? One of her first albums. I mean, I went to Tower Records with my mom and my sister on 65th Street when I was like 7 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
And my sister was getting a Britney Spears album, and I went for Get Rich or Die Trying. And my sister, I remember, chastised my mom because there was the explicit warning on it. But
I missed that Tower. I grew up on the Upper West Side.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And
Where'd you go to elementary school?
I went to PS 87.
That's where I went. I went to PS 87.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding at all.
What?
No, amazing. So, who'd you have for kindergarten?
Who did I have for kindergarten? She's probably dead by now. I'm decades older than you. I don't even remember her last name. My God, you're putting me on the spot. Wait, where did you go to junior high?
Wait, let's go through the teachers. Let's go to the teachers.
Well, none of the teachers are still there. Are you kidding me?
Okay, Miss Davis I had for kindergarten. Did you have Miss Davis? Emily Davis?
Are you kidding? Why are we comparing? You're 20 years younger than me.
Okay,
You're
fair.
going to make me so sad.
No, okay, all right. Junior high, which is middle school, not to age you, but no, would have been Delta.
Okay.
Which is in the Booker T. Washington building on the Upper West Side, and that was a miserable 3 years.
That's not the one, because I went across the street. I don't know what it's called now. IS-44 at the time.
But no, that's 70. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. IS-44 is the middle school that's across the street from PS-87.
Yeah.
There's also computer school around there. Oh, is that where you went?
No, but when I went to middle school, junior high, whatever we want to call it, they had just split it up into the computer school, and there were a couple other kind of sub schools part of IS-44.
Right, because in New York City they're always doing that. They're always taking these big buildings that were made in the 20s or 30s, and they stick 4 different programs with fancy names in them, School of whatever, some specific thing. When would you go to high school?
I went to Stuyvesant for a year.
You went to Stuyvesant, okay.
But then they kicked
We're on a
me out.
podcast. I'm not going to crack a bunch of jokes.
No,
but,
they kicked me out because I never went to school.
Oh, you got kicked out.
I got kicked out because I'm the saddest ne'er-do-well ever. I spent my freshman year, I didn't smoke, drink, do anything bad. I just didn't go to class. So they kicked me out, and my parents had to fork over big bucks to send me to Dalton for 3 years.
Oh my gosh! Oh yeah, I have great friends that went to Dalton.
Yeah.
And but wow, getting kicked out of Stuyvesant—that's like the New York City equivalent of Zuckerberg, like dropping out of Harvard or something.
Stuyvesant is a smarty pants school, but clearly I couldn't cut it.
Stuyvesant's like, for those listening that don't know it, is the best school in New York that is incredibly hard to get into.
So I didn't realize we had this many parallels. This is
Yes.
cool. So where did you grow up in the city? Which
I grew up in
neighborhood?
Hell's Kitchen on 43rd and 9th.
Okay, nice. And your parents are still here in town?
My
or-
parents are still here, yeah, and a little bit back and forth with friends.
Got it. Okay, so talk to me a little bit, because I'm a New York City snob, but it always
Sure.
ends up coming up a lot
Sure.
in conversations here. Do you feel like, I mean, we're all obviously defined by where we grew up. How do you feel like New York defines you?
I love that question because I take an inordinate amount of like baseless pride in the fact that I'm from New York.
Nothing you had control over, but you're going to
No, you're just from it. But as it relates to the identity thing, that's really a huge part of acting for me, or the ability for myself, not necessarily for audiences, because that's their distinction to make and their report card to fill out. But it's always helped me, like, a real sense of ambiguity personally about where I'm from. And, you know, my mom's from New York. My grandparents are from the Bronx. My great-grandparents on my mom's side were Russian immigrants, Jewish, that were kind of fleeing, not kind of, were fleeing persecution. And on my dad's side were French, you know, Protestants, not from like Paris, France, but like from, you know, Saint-Étienne or Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, or, you know, these are also beautiful areas, but it's not the, you know, Parisian
not
landscape that
clueless
is Americanized.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And so, like I said, there's I want to say there's a feeling of envy when I see people that really know themselves, but there really isn't. Like, I love this feeling of I have no clue who I am, and what's thrilling or maybe destabilizing or ultimately not a great thing, but that, like, I'm kind of figuring out while doing these films. And already, like, I did a movie called Miss Stevens when I was 19. And already it's it's interesting for me to go back and watch that, and I see a version of myself that isn't false, but just isn't who I am today.
Sure. Well,
so,
you're in particular, like, not to like put you in a place in terms of your age, but you're at this period of time where you're evolving probably at a rapid rate.
No, it's destabilizing. I watch Call Me by Your Name, and I'm like, oh man, I look so young. Yes, I've aged significantly. The stress of show business at a young age.
Well, it's also obviously been a surreal, bizarre year, to say the least.
Oh yeah.
That I guess probably kicked off with Sundance with Call Me by Your Name.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's so. Yeah, it's been. It's so weird. This is the stuff you dream about, and I say that not in contrast to what the experience is, because the experience has been absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
And yet it is totally weird, and particularly with Sundance, because as a young actor, like, I did a TV show called Homeland, and then the idea was that I maybe could have done some television shows around that, but the idea is like, okay, I'm going to swing for the fences, and the way you do that is to you know do independent films with directors that are already established or look to be, you know, exciting. And really, like, the email pattern almost is like, you know, this will go to Sundance, or this will be a big thing at Sundance. And I was a part of a number of projects, that even some that were developed at the Sundance Lab too, in fact, that weren't at Sundance. So it becomes a holy grail of sorts. And the tremendous irony is the commonality tone they try to infuse with that festival, and then it's just like, we're all just here, and it's just a normal experience, and we're all wearing plaid shirts, and yet, like, there are deals being made for, you know, absurd amounts of money. So yeah, it's been a weird year.
Well, and also the fact that this one in particular, Call Me by Your Name, has been years in the making, not only by you, but by filmmakers, James Ivory, et cetera, have all been trying to kind of like figure out how to get this off the ground with different permutations of cast, et cetera. And you were attached to it for what, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, when I was 17. But in that way, and it also helped the production of it and the making of it, and so that I didn't audition for someone a week before I started and had the feeling, okay, I have to match the audition, but rather I had known Luca for 4 years before we started shooting. I hung out with James Ivory a week upstate in New York, and we went through his films. Like, there was such a preparation in this. And then there was the Europeanisms to this character that I had not addressed in performance before. All the European parts of myself I associated with, not like repression, but certainly not the outgoingness that is fed as a young person growing up in New York or at a middle school where it's very academic and the only outlet for any sort of attention is to make the biggest fool of yourself as possible. And so to be acting in French even was so weird because it felt like worlds colliding, and there wasn't like these ideas or the identity of this character and how I relate to it still hasn't, metamorphosized, if that's a word, in my head. And it's really in watching it that there's the strongest identity to the thing. Yeah.
It must also be like it's a double-edged sword when you're like attached to a project that early on where like, you can accumulate all this experience and your understanding of the character and the project can evolve. At the same time, in the back of your head, you're like, this could still fall apart. Maybe I'm going to get too old. Maybe they're going to, maybe a filmmaker's going to come and go. That happens all the time.
Or like James Ivory was supposed to direct it and Luca was producing it. And James, I knew, wanted me to be Elio in it. And then it came time for Luca to direct it. And then there wasn't really a conversation around it, and I just kind of stayed the lead. But it was actually in a Q&A the other day. I forget what the question was that set it up, but Luca alluded to someone bringing up the fact that I was cast as Elio when he was made director, and the idea being floated to him, and he confirmed it, and he went, okay, this is a cool idea. But it was floated to him. There was the moment where he could have been like, no, I'm going to open this up.
It's not out of the question when a filmmaker comes on board as a director, they want to present their wholly unique vision, and to inherit another person's actor.
And Luca certainly signed. Luca cast me. In fact, I met with him before I met with James Ivory, and
he was developing. He was like
producer,
kind of
exactly.
Co-directed or something. There were different permutations.
I think at that point he was developing it, or I think he might have already been co-directing it. But certainly, like, he gave me the stamp of approval, even first. Like I said, I might think, but when it came time to actually doing it, there was a second conversation, second thought process.
Were there other actors that you met with or talked to besides Army? Because I remember like Shia was mentioned. I don't know if that was for that part or what. Did you get a chance to kind of mix it up with other actors along the way?
Yeah, yes, exactly. We did a number of rehearsals with Shia, who was and is like one of my favorite actors, and it's just so inspiring.
He comes up on this podcast a lot because I go way back with Shia, and I'm a huge admirer of his because I think he gets misunderstood a lot. He's just so passionate about what he does.
Yeah, and not in a masochistic or romanticizing way. Yeah. That's part of the appeal as a performer, as an actor. I can't even really tell. Because when I watch Nymphomaniac or American Honey, that mystery and that mystery is like not even almost good enough a word, but that's all I can get to right now. Is just, it's so tangible on screen.
He brings a rawness where it's like, wait, is this happening? Like, is it like there's like a tangible like danger to his performances that is palpable?
Right. Yeah.
It jumps off the screen. So, what was his take on the character much different than Army's? That would have been a much different film.
didn't. The truth is, I wouldn't even be able to give you a succinct answer on that because it never progressed beyond a stage where if we were reading scenes together, our heads were in the page, like we didn't know our lines. Yeah. Which is fair because it was like a year away from being made or something. But no, it's like you said, it's like in all his films, there's a certain rawness, and he had just worked with Gary Oldman on a film, so he was kind of bringing that ethos. We just had one meeting, one rehearsal. It was all a day, but that really stuck with me too, in such a way that I even feel hesitant sometimes, where I'm like, I don't want to beat myself up as an actor, because you don't give your talent credit if you think, I need to be in pain.
Right. Is that something you've thought about? Because I've had that conversation with a lot of actors where it's like, whether it's just accumulating life experience, that's one thing, but also there is this notion that some actors have had, and it comes into various points in their career where they're like, I have to suffer for my art.
Well, that's exactly it, and this is independent of Shia now. These are just thoughts I've had myself, but if that's exactly how you put it, where there's this, and pressure is the exact word, and so that, Saoirse said to me once, male actors lose their mind at 24 years old. Don't lose your mind. And I hated that because I'm like, man, now I'm just waiting for 3 years now.
Ticking time bomb.
I didn't hate it at all. Actually, I deeply appreciate any advice she gives me. But no, and this is something I talk about and think about a lot, and certainly, like, I in my short experience, I feel like I've already worked with people that can fall prey to that ethos, and it's very much a thing where people that found success early as it relates to things that weren't infused with dramatic prestige then feel like, okay, how can I
they still have something to prove to themselves and to the rest of the world.
But beyond that, like, I think there's I don't know, there's like the idea that it can't be fun or something, and the idea isn't to have fun, but
they're
like,
not
I just work with
exclusive.
Steve. They're not, and you do yourself a disservice. Like the idea that you scowl your way through a scene that could have been humorous,
right,
in the name of like Marlon Brando or something,
right,
isn't productive. And I just worked with Steve Carell on a movie for 3 months that took more out of me. Here I am being masochistic, but like really took more out of me than any project I've ever been a part of. Right. And that was like a 3-month shoot, and that dealt with drug addiction and just to see how he works and how he so doesn't fall prey to the idea that it's everything or nothing, and that he has a family, and like, it's no joke, I really wasn't doing these podcasts before. Nobody really cared about what I have to say. And now that I am in this, at least tangentially or a little bit more public, you look at the roadmap for young male actors, even the ones that sort of made it piece together, and it's not great. So I'm even finding like there's so many nights now, whether it's, I don't know, like after parties of sorts, or even if there are no organized things, there's just like alcohol everywhere, and you just got to be careful because this is
slippery slope.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
And this is the time where you want.
And this is exactly, and you feel like you're doing well. And also, my generation, and this is why I felt so important to be making a movie like Beautiful Boy. And I don't know what the luck of the universe was that after auditioning for bigger projects for years, 2 things came my way that are smaller and are important stories to tell, without a degree of pretension. I really feel, and like, and as I was talking about alcohol, like, there's such, for my my age, particularly with opiates and pills and things like that, but in the music and the culture, I was talking about this the other day. I was talking about Post Malone with a director I'd worked with. His name's Elijah Bynum. He directed a movie I'm in called Hot Summer Nights, and we were talking about hip hop a little bit, and he was saying, it went from a culture of celebrating distribution to celebration of use, which that's his thought. So that's not my thought, in case that's wrong. No,
sure,
and I hadn't thought about it in that way before, and I wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. You see, like, I feel like I just escaped a pop culture influx that is way more, maybe it's the fact that Trump's president or something, but is way more like balls to the wall, in such a way that there were groups like Nirvana, and obviously in the 60s there were a lot of people that, in the 27 Club. But I feel like now it's, I don't know, maybe it's creepier, maybe it's because it's contemporary, but there's a pressure that is stifling around this stuff that is also cynical and masochistic in a way that earlier generations, I don't think, were so negative about everything all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we're talking about now.
No, it's good. I'm curious because, like, it's one thing that I sense from you, and it's indicative of like the work that you've done early on in your career, is that you have a lot of focus. It would seem as an actor, and and I don't associate focus with teenagers. You're not a teenager anymore, but you were working throughout your teens.
Right.
Was acting sort of just like a way, like a kind of a lucky place to kind of channel your focus at the time, you think? Did you kind of like need acting to kind of keep you on the straight and narrow, or like what did acting fulfill in you early on, you think?
Well, it's changed, and there was a significant change in that I was already working in my senior year of high school, which was a drama high school, so that was where I learned and really spent a lot of time at it. I was doing Homeland, so there was this weird dual approach to acting where I'd be on a set where you drop everything, including even character research, and you think, okay, how does this become presentable as storytelling? Right. And then you go back to a classroom where you're still learning, and where creating a scene isn't a collaboration with the director, but you're, being told what to do, and directors aren't paying attention to the way scenes play out, but just the truth of the moment. And then when I got, that was the tension for me, because I went to Columbia for a year. When I graduated, all of a sudden it was like, it was the red door, blue door thing. 2 paths presented themselves where it was like, okay, are you going to take this seriously? Or like 3 paths. Take this totally seriously and commit yourself to it fully.
Right.
Kind of commit to it, but be at Columbia at the same time. Or just go to school and drop it, which was never really a path anyway.
Right.
And being in school thing at the same time, which a lot of actors have done, not again, like I want to be so careful never to be pretentious or anything, but like it just seemed not like the right approach to me. And I really got scared where I made a joke in an interview earlier today where like you get beaten in a good way. You get beaten down at LaGuardia to wear your heart on your sleeve. And the way a lot of people talk about Call Me by Your Name is that it's, emotionally, you've not in an emotive sense, but you know what's going on with the characters. And I joke like that's because it was bred in me almost. And the idea of getting a sense of comfort around academia, and not in a prejudiced way, but like there's a certain elitism and influx of money at a place like Columbia that just scared the shit out of me, because I thought like, dear God, I want to become boring. And so then acting became not what was like therapy in high school in a way of, not in a cheesy way, but like finding yourself as a person, but also the idea that you're, acting in front of girls you have crushes on sometimes, just things like that. Then it was like, okay, I got to take this seriously. And then left school when Interstellar came out, thinking like, okay, I got this. And then never in a way, and it would be insulting for me to be like, the struggle. Sure. But in a way where I was like, this, I don't know. And then I did a film called Miss Stevens that dramatically has about as much integrity as anything I've done, and it's been really interesting, like what it means to me acting. Sometimes I almost feel like it's an honorable way to channel a need to be, and there's also the feeling that I couldn't not, which maybe isn't a good reason to do something, but the idea of like even with more graciousness now, certainly I'm trying to like get better at it, but because things are going well now, but like you see billboards of things that you've auditioned for or whatever, and you're like, man,
but it's so funny because, as you well know, like you can only steer your career so far. Like I've talked to so many actors with decades more experience even than you, and for many of them it was just taking the job that was available. Right. And for you, like, look, there's obviously a tremendous amount of talent involved. There's also a degree of luck involved that like these kinds of films are the films that you're immediately now known for, where like, somehow you've missed or didn't get or didn't want the YA thing or the teen sex comedy thing or the CW show. Like, and some of these things can be okay. They're fine, but it sounds like they're not even like close to necessarily what you wanted. And
no, in fact, like the idea was always, because I was up for some of those other projects, but the idea was like, okay, you do something like that, and then because of the way the laws govern this business, like then you're more visible, and then you can finance an independent film or whatever, in such a way that I have an actor friend who's tremendously talented that I've known for a couple years now, and is one of these, I don't want to say like masochistic, but like really takes his work extremely seriously, and in a way that is very inspiring. And he never wanted to play the publicity game. And I saw him in a movie a couple months ago that he was so good in, but it like kind of tore me up to watch it because it felt like in a vacuum or something. Yeah. And that's why it's important for me to go on something like this, and why I'm so thrilled that it's like Call Me by Your Name. That's the introduction, in such a way that maybe some of these bigger budget things would be like a real dissemination of my image or something, and then to not to be like too picky or something, but there are other like there indies of this nature that are also like introductions that are so self-serious in such a way that, if I may say so myself, I don't think anybody goes to Call Me by Your Name, even though it deals a lot with like philosophy and all that, but I don't think exactly the way I just put it, philosophy and all that. I don't feel like people are getting preached at and lectured. You don't go out the credits don't roll and people look around to see like how they're supposed to gauge it.
It's an emotional response as much as it is intellectual.
Which is why like we'll get asked sometimes about the reception or things down the line, and the real truth of an answer is, look, we didn't make this thing for a bubble. Like, this is something that people viscerally react to, and that's the thing that is like stunning to me. Like you said before, like I don't know how it's not some of these bigger projects that I was up for, but rather I almost feel like I circumvented it or something. And then we'll see. I know who goes from here. Maybe it's all downhill from here. But, maybe this interview will be a totem of my youth. I'll listen back on.
Remember when it all went wrong?
With a glass of whiskey and a cigarette, and I'll be yelling at a vision of my imagination that's not in the room. Give me another drink. No, okay.
I used to have this podcast.
I was on a podcast with Josh once. Who's the new guy?
So it is interesting, though. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like talking about these paths that you didn't go down. You were up for Spider-Man. It sounds like you were in the running. You were one of the finalists. At the time, was that something that you were passionate about, or was it something like? I mean, you obviously don't say no to an opportunity like that.
Well, I was totally torn up because this was that year that I was out of Columbia. I wasn't really working. 19's a weird, any age is a weird age, but that's like the epitome of not quite a kid, not quite a adult. And I was torn up because that's what there was to think about in such a way that I was always fearing that, not fearing, but I thought, man, if I get this, how could I say no to it?
Right.
And with the idea that I had looked at a lot of Andrew Garfield interviews, and I don't think Tobey Maguire ever spoke about it publicly this way, but Andrew really takes his work very seriously, and I saw him in Death of a Salesman when I was 15 with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and this is not interview, podcast, hyperbole. That changed me. His performance in that, and I've never said that, anyway, nobody cares about these things anymore, or whatever, but I've never said that, and I've been hesitant to say it because I've even seen him at a couple things, and I've yet to go up to him because I just want to pick the moment where I'm randomly feeling like confident or something, as opposed to like going over there shaking. But and yet that didn't feel like a big warning. Like I always had the feeling because it felt like a lottery or something, and those things really are. Like there's so many people involved in the process. There's so many people up for it. So, but certainly now, and not as an indication of how it was me, because I saw Spider-Man: Homecoming. In fact, I watched it and I thought, "Yep, good on them," because he's the right guy for it.
Right.
And yet, if that was the kind of thing now, I really don't. That would not. I feel a certain pressure, and it's a gift that I look at like Heath Ledger or Andrew or Shia or whoever, and that there were these like requisites in their youth of like YA hoops to jump through or something, and that somehow there's a gift right now. Like I said, that look, it's just this project, and it's presumptuous to think there'll be anything more, but you jumped a couple steps. You didn't have to go through Shia I mean, all the people you mentioned would be very open about it. I've talked to Shia about Transformers a lot, and Andrew, as much as he loved Spider-Man, I think he has conflicting feelings about how that. And it's actually interesting to talk to Shia about Transformers, which I have. By the way, this is funny. Like that day we had with where I did meet with Shia, and he was the one that was like, let's read this thing, let's go for it. And that's funny because I'd never read for Luca or James. Talk about auditioning, talk about not having an audition, and all of a sudden being like, okay, here's an actor that just from a really beautiful artistic purity level just wants to read it. Who can go from project to project, and I really can't yet. And I was thinking, oh man, this doesn't go well. But that was during that period, and he said, dude, you cannot do that film. He said what I would have done, not to do Transformers. And yet I watched, after that day, I watched some Shia interviews where he said, he would talk about like Michael Bay like an auteur of sorts, which he really is kind of.
I mean, he's a genius in his own way.
And there's some story about a film school where it wasn't like PTA, it was like some amazing filmmaker, and they all had a short film class, and everybody put together like these, clever, dialogue-heavy short films. And Michael Bay slapped a camera on the back of his Chevy and just like drove around town, and then edited it together like the most awesome car sequence in the world. I'm seeing Kathleen Kennedy on that poster to Back to the Future right there. Yeah. It's a big producer name. So I was with Luca the other night at one of these whatever war things, and Michael Barker, who's the head of Sony Picture Classics, and they say, Timothy, meet Kathleen Kennedy. She's the producer, and this is genuine. I just don't, I don't know these things. So I said, what's the? I said, what film
are you up to? What are you working on?
Well, I said, what's the film you're here with? And she was kind of stunned, and she said, Star Wars. And if I could have drowned in my shoes and started to swim, that would have been exactly what happened. I think I made up for it. And there's always like the good thing of, even if it's feigned, of like,
yeah,
I don't know.
You probably earned some cool points with her. Actually,
Yeah.
he doesn't need me.
Or
maybe I need him.
Or yeah, exactly. Or she went home and took out that list and X'd my name off it.
She sketched you as a Jedi Knight in her notebook. so saying that, because I mean, yeah, as you were saying, like the choices that you've made and the opportunities that have come allow you now to get some really cool opportunities. You worked with Carell recently. You worked on the Woody Allen film. So where are you at now in reconciling the kind of that other path? Like, do you have interest in those kinds of films, in the Star Wars and the superhero things at all? Or are you content to kind of work?
No, that's a great question because I do like the scariest thought for me, particularly as it relates to like period pieces, is the idea that nobody's going to see them. Yeah. And I really can't stand, even at a level of like podcasts or as a listener to podcasts, or when I watch late night shows or when I watch interviews, and particularly when you watch movies, what's worse than being bad is being boring. And I cannot stand that. And oh man, I wish I want to reference something, but I won't. But like, especially as it relates to like independent films or like things that are artistic, if it's boring, that kills me. Right. And I really don't want to be acting in a vacuum. Right. And if this election really illuminated anything, it's that,
unfortunately, the most entertaining candidate, even if they have horrible ideas, wins.
And I don't even mean it like that. I mean it. Yeah, that's actually speaks directly what I'm talking about. But rather, what I'm talking about is that I don't want to act in a bubble. And as it relates to like choosing projects going forward, there's like, I feel a great tension where there's like the personal acting path that not that anybody would care, but for me, as it relates to what it is for me, like I want to challenge myself. Sure. And there are ways to be a part of projects that are experimental and not quote unquote boring, but a little more not as attuned to the viewer, that have great integrity acting wise. And yet with Call Me by Your Name now, like we talk about this visceral feeling, right. And I don't want to get 12 steps ahead of myself, but like Beautiful Boy is a movie about addiction and young people dealing with addiction in such a way that there have been movies made about drug addiction, but not or to my knowledge, not the Al-Anon experience, not the experience of being a relative or a parent of someone who's going through addiction. And so that I've had that experience, and a lot of people my age have had that experience. So between that and Call Me by Your Name, which is a movie that, as it relates to the, queer canon, as I've heard other people talk about it, it's great because it celebrates sexuality in such a way where there isn't a repressant and AIDS or a gang of violent antagonizers. Right. So that feels important and new. So when I look at those two stories and how fresh and tonally like visceral they are or something. Yeah. And then, like I said, with Beautiful Boy, I'm getting ahead of myself because maybe people will see that and be like,
but if it feels right,
this is no good. But so then I feel like a responsibility to like, okay, man, hunker down, go out for cheap meals because maybe you shouldn't work for a while. So I don't know. We'll see.
Are you a cinephile? Like, have you become one? I mean, are you?
Here's the thing. Like, people rag on me sometimes because I don't have the cinephiliac, which is not a word. That's a weird word. Encyclopedic knowledge that a lot of people will have. But, without like airing things people don't want to know. I asked Christian Bale when I was working with him how many movies he watched a year, and the answer was not voluminous. So
if it's good enough for Bale,
yeah, exactly.
Like Aaron Eckhart, I interviewed him once. He's like, I think he said to me he hadn't seen a movie period in like a decade. Not one of his own movies, like a movie.
Oh no like, way! What? Are you serious? Wow. He didn't see.
That might be the extreme. Don't go that
that's
far.
That's the extreme. No. And the truth is, I watch movies all the time, and here's not a cheesy way again. It can be hard, particularly when I'm shooting something. I never watch anything when I'm shooting something. I'll watch documentaries or I'll watch cartoons because it's just very intimidating, and you don't want to replicate things people are doing. So what's inspiring to me, these like old films especially, it feels preachy again sometimes, and I don't want to be one. I don't want to be one of these. This is the tension with acting. Is like I don't want to act in a vacuum. And the gift of being a part of those bigger projects is you really are like disseminated to a younger audience. Yeah. And I don't like, I did a play in New York called Prodigal Son for 3.5 months that John Patrick Shanley wrote and directed. It was about a kid from the Bronx that goes to Catholic school and feels like unheard and unseen and unaccepted. And it was like the most amazing experience of my life. It's right before I did Call Me by Your Name. I like came of age as an actor on stage before I was able to go out and do this film. And a lot of people saw it, and it was like super satisfying. But the majority of the audiences were older audiences,
Right.
and
like you're talking about something that was hugely successful. That John Patrick Shanley, an amazing playwright, and at the end of the day, even something like that, 50,000 people may have seen it, and most of them were probably 55 and older.
And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, maybe the theater wouldn't survive with that consumer
Of course,
audience.
that's a beautiful thing in its own way. But
and yet, maybe just because by way of how expensive the tickets were, or whatever, or
Right.
because young people, they're not exposed to this stuff as much. I do not want I don't want to. Anyway, I never want to be like, I'm going to do these interesting projects and be a recluse and not
Right.
know what a meme is or whatever.
No, it's a push and a pull. I mean, you summed it up well. I mean, like at the end, especially something on Call Me by Your Name, where like you are like feeding off that drug right now of like a film that is touching audiences in such a profound way
Right.
in each and every screening, and it's
Right.
like you probably want more of that. Like that's something that's.
But again, that's why, it feels like naive or optimistic or to think like, okay, I'm going to try to do things like that. But there's the idea that you can do things that are fresh all the time, I would hope. And certainly when I look at like a guy like Xavier Dolan is super inspiring to me because beyond any sense of autonomy, he really is pushing the envelope.
Right.
And a movie like Mommy visually is unlike anything, or at least I've ever seen. Or when you watch something like Enter the Void, or James White, which is the movie not a ton of people saw,
Right,
but
right.
that's maybe my favorite movie now, or one of my favorites. So and so there's this idea of being able to push a boundary in such a way that, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm like here now and I sense it, but when I think that Greta Gerwig and the Safdie brothers were roommates in New York, and
I didn't know that. Is that that's crazy?
that is true, and that Greta made Lady Bird, which is this incredible movie that is so specific tonally and is very much an independent film, and yet avoids like all the tropes of indie films,
Right.
or you think they're about to dive into them and they skirt them.
Right.
And then Josh Safdie made this crazy movie called Good Time,
so great.
after this crazy movie called Heaven Knows What, and that they were roommates and that there was like a flowering there. And I feel like, okay, and then with Xavier or who else, and maybe this is like too self-prophesizing, but I feel like, okay, here's an opportunity to be making movies that aren't on huge budgets, but are like made by...
Yeah, they're making it on their own terms. It's authentic to them. It might not be this. There's very little in common beyond them being unique to the filmmaker and them fulfilling their own
and like labors
visions.
of love,
Yes.
in
The
such a way
passion is
that
there,
in such a way that what a gift for filmmakers past, that you can just kind of talk about whatever. But I find it not talk about whatever, but I find whether it's budgetary restrictions or like a really intense idea from audiences, and I guess it goes back to Marlon Brando, who just started acting like real life, and Meryl Streep, who started working with the speech coach in the 70s, where things have to be simultaneously real now and like far from self. That's the thing when people haven't been in show business or acting, even at a young age.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that is, because I guess the conversation amongst kids was not this in the 30s and 40s, but even for young people now, like 12, 13, 14, when they talk about acting or good performances, it's always like, how real was it and how far from self was it?
Right.
And to that degree, what am I doing? I'm all over the place. I'm rambling,
No, it's good.
but there's a certain, I don't know what's exciting is the idea, like, push the envelope and don't make it boring. Don't. And what's cool, not cool, devastating because Trump's the president, but I really believe, like, with the, like, tone, like the negative drip over everything now, and this like cynicism that has so permeated everything, we don't even realize it's there anymore. That's why I really do think movies like Lady Bird or Call Me by Your Name or Disaster Artist are being received warmly, because they're like they're celebrations. And Call Me by Your Name is still sad, but it's a celebration and it's joyful. And like even some of the meetings I've had recently, like not recently, this is all a privilege anyway. Like this is all so amazing, but I feel like you're gonna see an aversion towards like. Even with the little things I've written sometimes, and I'm really no writer, it's too easy to write fuck every other word,
right.
or like have such shock value on screen. Again, I'm gonna cut myself off because I could like talk about something recently I saw, but like it's too easy that way.
Well, and an aversion perhaps to artifice too, to the glossiness and fakeness. I mean, we hear, obviously the word of the year is fake news. The term of the year is fake news. But like the thing that you talk about, I've heard you talk about, is authenticity, and the actors that you've cited and that we've talked about a bunch in this conversation are actors that value kind of just, They can't stand a fake moment. And, I've talked before about like Kristen Stewart's been someone I've known for a while and has been on this podcast a few times. And she's somebody that like can't stand BS at all. Like she'll cut herself off in the middle of a take if it feels the slightest.
Oh yeah. And you can see that in her acting.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree.
Anyway, so on the press side of things, I'm fascinated because like this has also been a year where you've probably talked more in this year of your life than the 20 years prior combined.
Right.
Has it been an adjustment to kind of become like somewhat of a public figure to you just did your first late night talk show the other day, like all this stuff. Is this something you were talking about, like the valuing being entertaining and not being boring?
Right.
Is it something that you find, like, do you have imposter syndrome where you're like talking and you're like, why the fuck does anybody care what I'm talking about? Or,
yeah, a little bit. There's that feeling of like wait
I'm the
a
same
second,
guy that I was a year ago.
But
why
also
is
the feeling of like if I'm here and I'm winging it, that means everybody else is winging it.
True.
So that's a really strange feeling. There was a weird thing with this film where I had too long to think about the idea that all of a sudden there was going to be like a press run and a public side to these things that there wasn't before.
Because you had like a 6-month gap.
Yeah, exactly.
Sundance, and then you knew there was this love for it, and it was going to ramp up with the fall festivals.
I mean, you knew, but then you also don't know because things go south all the time, and I have great like mentors and people that say, look, man, expect nothing,
right.
And like Army, who's been on this train many a time,
right.
So yeah, it's a little. I find it to be destabilizing, not in the like cliched way where people think it's related to ego or you get like an aggrandized sense of self, but rather environments become just unfamiliar. And I find what it is like accepting compliments on camera more than anything because that's like dehumanizing. I think people see that, and then that's what makes people, I think more than anything, more than like cool clothes or whatever, it's like that is weird because that doesn't happen in real life. People don't get compliments for no reason. So
not to the degree that actors and filmmakers and public figures do.
Well, because there's the icebreaker at the beginning of the thing. Yeah. And anyway, so like I said, but I feel like it's a necessary part of the job, and I really am like a pop culture fan. I took an Andy Warhol class last year in school, like. And certainly would be naive to like want to be like, I desire to be a part of this machine now, because like I said, the roadmap, like even just psychologically, is not great amongst people that you even work with sometimes. And yet, like, I'm a Kid Cudi fan, I'm a Leonardo DiCaprio fan, I'm a Kanye fan, like. I don't want to be watching interviews like why am I trying to bore, like boring is not the right thing again, because it's more boredom and less to do with wanting to be entertaining, because that's also a big trap. So I don't want people to think that, but I don't like want to play the role of like young actor, but that's what's kind of exciting.
For school and whatever.
Worse, like not cool enough for school. Like I'm
above. I'm
about Shakespeare.
Right.
So
did far be it from me to pry into someone's private life, but you were in a relationship with a pretty public person by familial relationship at least. Did that help you kind of with perspective on this whole fame and publicity thing, at least being kind of tangentially around that a few years back?
Yes and no. Yes, because there's the exposure to it, but then no, because the person I was with, the whole family, it's unlike the public necessity of being an entertainer and a musician is way different than what any actor goes through. In fact, if you follow the Philip Seymour Hoffman, Daniel Day-Lewis, Christian Bale school of acting, you're really supposed to stay mysterious, which I'm totally crucifying
with
right
this
now.
podcast, if nothing else. Yes. So Beautiful Boys, the next one we're going to see you in, presumably?
Exactly.
Is that going to do the festival circuit, do we know?
I don't know. I think I don't know. I mean, it's totally the feeling I had with Call Me by Your Name, where I got back from Italy and I met with my agents in New York, and there was a project we were discussing that maybe I could have done, and they were saying, "What do you think?" And I said, I don't know why, but I really think this thing we did in Italy. This is not the feeling before or during. There was no shot called then. There was like the opportunity to work with Luca.
You're like, guys, I think we just nailed it.
Killing it. We're killing it. No, before it was the Luca, James Ivory, Andre Osman, 3 months in Italy, and then after it was like, and similarly, I don't know. It'll be different because just by way of the subject matter, it's heavy stuff in such a way that Call Me by Your Name isn't. So, like, it's not an upper of a film,
sure.
but
it sounds like it has. There's a good feeling surrounding at least the experience of making it.
The experience of making it was fucking nuts, and was surreal, and like, and your mind knows you're acting, but when you drop 20 pounds and you're under a rain machine for 8 takes in a t-shirt, your body doesn't know you're acting.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was a lot of doctor visits on that movie and a lot of close calls. So
crazy.
Yeah, I can't fucking wait to see it.
And lastly, before I let you go, one of the fun things about this strange season is, like, I noticed, like, you've done at least one of these, like, kind of actors roundtable things. Like,
yeah,
these, like,
that's crazy.
So yeah, what is that like to kind of like, you're surrounded by the Hugh Jackmans? I don't even know who else was on like the roundtable you just did.
It's very surreal and like I don't know. I try to find a roadmap for these things. I do not want to be 26 or 31 looking at my peak, And then those roundtable, when the conversation comes my way, which is rare, thankfully rare, because I don't. What do I have to offer amongst like legends?
Denzel
like
can take that one.
Yeah, no, Denzel was not there. By the way, if Denzel was there, I don't know if I would have been able to sit there because he's one of the guys I've looked up to the most. So, yeah, what do you have to say to those things? Nothing. I mean, you and like I really because the conversation at the round table I did was like, kind of moderator said, "So what were you guys doing at that age?" And they all have or I was working hard, or Franco says the McDonald's accent story that I've read in his books, or Gary Oldman said I was in theater school, and Hugh Jackman said that too. So the unsaid thing in the air is like, all right, kid, let's see what you have. But then, with the winning mixture of sincerity and humor,
You found the secret sauce.
I'm stealing that from. I'm stealing that from Kumail, who said that at the Hollywood Film Awards. He got up there and he gave a speech that was so funny, and then he said, "Winning mixture of sincerity and humor,"
amazing.
Which is hilarious.
Well, he's coming in a couple of days too.
Is he really?
Yeah, you're part of it.
That guy is so funny, and like we did another panel with him that was in the Hamptons. It was Variety does this thing called 10 People to Watch,
right.
and then so all the actors are outside this hotel, and I was trying to be deferential and polite, particularly as one of the young people there. And so they were sending people in the cars ahead of us, and then I got in the car, and then you couldn't make this up, like a dog parade of all dog parades crosses, and then like so then all of a sudden I've been made late to this thing. So I get there, I'm all frazzled, I'm manic. I say sorry, I'm so sorry. Like there was a dog parade, you wouldn't believe it, and they wouldn't let me get in. And then Kumail said, he uses that excuse every time. And the rest of the panel, like I try to like have serious answers, and like the dog parade guy,
right.
And he killed me, in a great way. It was very funny. And afterwards, I said, it was an honor as a fan of Silicon Valley to be roasted up there. And then we were at the Hollywood Film Awards, and he got up there to accept an award for The Big Sick, and I kind of like sat back in my seat, and I don't feel like anybody else did it, but I was like, okay, this is going to go down. I feel it. And sure enough, Ray Romano gets up there too. And Kumail goes on this whole bit where he's like, Ray, I saw you weren't sitting at the Big Sick table. I saw you sitting with Kate Winslet. How is it over there? And then Ray Romano, of all people, gets like flush in the face. And I thought, this guy, I think he's going to, again, who am I to say this? It's been the theme of this interview, but I think he's going to like skyrocket. I think there's going to be a lot more with him.
Oh, he's amazing, man. I'm sure you're getting this advice a lot. My one bit of advice that's not brilliant is just, enjoy this time, man. This is, as you well know, this is kind of a unique experience with this film in particular for you, Call Me By Your Name, and to get a chance to kind of like, touch audiences and to mix it up with like the best filmmakers and actors on these silly kind of award shows and mixers. I mean, it has a silly side, but it's No,
it's totally surreal.
It's great, man. And it's well deserved. It really is.
Thank you, man. And I really am trying to appreciate it.
I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more in the years to come. Congrats again, buddy. And as I said, I'm sure I'll see you a bunch the next couple months on the circuit.
Hopefully.
And so ends another edition of Happy, Sad, Confused. Remember to review, rate, and subscribe to this show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a big podcast person. I'm Daisy Ridley, and I definitely wasn't pressured to do this by Josh.